And this is it, the last part of our journey through all the cars that were sold off as part of the Gaydon Motor Museum clear out back in June 2003, where they sold off nearly 70 less significant exhibits. And in this final part, we're going to see what we can find out about lots 58 to 67. So let's switch over to voiceover version and see what we found out. Lot 58 is a last off the line Land Rover Discovery. It done just 44 miles. It was a 98 model and it sold for 18,400 at the auction. Finished in quite a rare colour, which is Charleston green. Now, of course, this one was unregistered, so didn't have a registration number, so can make it tricky to track down, but not in this case because we found it at the Dunsfold collection. It's now registered as R955KMV, and it's one of their cars. And interestingly, it's had an LPG conversion at some point, which the museums say they are intending to remove. And looking at DVLA, we can see down there is actually marked as gas bi-fuel, which is quite rare for a lot of LPG conversions. Last MOT on that one expired in 2020 and it had a logbook in 2014, so I'm guessing that is when Dunsfold got it. MOT wise, it done 5,700 miles by the time it had been MOT in 2005, which was a couple of years after it been sold at Gaydon, and it's still only done at its last MOT in 2019 35,000 miles, so that's still a very low mileage car. Lot 59, now this was the most expensive car of the day, and it was a 1910 Austin 1824 Endcliffe Tourer. Now this sold for £91,700 and it had a very distinctive registration number of FF1, and this apparently was originally issued to a Lanchester in January 1904. Now, diving on DVLA, it's got no details for FF1, so I dug a bit deeper and I found the car for sale a couple of years later, again by Bonhams, but this time it's registered as SV9833. So obviously something has gone on there, and within the description they mentioned that the registration number had significantly uplifted the price at Gaydon and has been removed by the purchaser. So having a roll forward for that number plate, I have managed to find it currently for sale on Reg Transfers for a quite eye-watering £425,000. So whoever got that number plate did rather well out of that. But going back to the original car, I have found it on Flickr on Marty Miller's page, and it's pictured in June 2015. But apart from that, I really haven't got very much on that car at all. And when I go back to DVLA again, I find that SV9833 is a registration number that can't be found. So I'm a little bit bemused by that one. So if anyone can help, as usual, drop us a comment. Lot 60 was a 61 Morris Minor 1000 saloon. Now this one was actually withdrawn from the auction, so didn't actually sell. It was almost a one owner car. I dived over to the DVLA just to have a quick look. Hadn't been taxed since 1987, so this one hasn't been on the road for a long time, so I'm guessing this is probably still in Gaydon's possession. Lot 61, now this was a Rover 2600S which had been sectioned. It wasn't registered but sold for £3,105. Now this hadn't been cut up as much as many of the cars we've seen, and it only had the passenger doors, which were actually included in the sale, and the B-post removed. So I think this made a very viable project for someone to sort of put it back together, and let's be honest, it's got to be an easier restoration than trying to hack the rust out of a 1970s British Leyland product. On my search for this car, I did come across some interesting pictures, and there's this one by D70 of a cutaway Rover SD1 at the 79 Frankfurt Auto Show. And I actually found it was in a museum, and here it is, this time in colour. And in fact, this car is in Northern Ireland at the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum, if anybody fancies going to take a look. Lot 62. Now this was a 1988 Rover 827 Sterling Transworld, and this sold for £2,300. Now the Transworld element of this was a Rover sponsored event to attempt to drive around the world in 45 days. and the car was presented as it had finished the event, and it was actually a left-hand drive car. Now, this seemed to be a car that nobody wanted, because it reappeared for sale a couple of years later, again with Bonhams, and this time it sold for £2,070, and then it came up for sale again the following year. This time it sold for just £1,380. Now, if we go over to DVLA, we can see it's not been taxed since 06, and the MOT expired in 07. But the interesting thing is, if we roll down the page, we discover the export marker is yes. So somewhere around about 2006, that one went for export. Lot 63 was a 99 Land Rover Freelander that had been sectioned. This sold for a reasonably healthy £3,335. Now, for those of you who have been paying attention from the previous episodes will know where I went looking for this. And yep, it was Rimmer Brothers. And it's featured here on their corporate film. There's a full frontal of it. And here it is a bit later on in the back of reception. So we know where that one is. Lot 64 was a 1951 Riley RMA saloon. This sold for just £517 at the auction. Now, I think the picture they used there is quite an old one, because it said it hadn't been MOT'd since 1977 and it was in need of full restoration. Now, if we have a look at DVLA on this one, it's showing it's not taxed for on-road use. I'm not quite sure what that means, but the FPN 604 number plate is still attached to that Riley, which I was quite surprised. I thought they might have been split up. And oddly, the last logbook was September 1996, which is 7 years before the auction. So not quite sure what's gone on with that one. Lot 65 was a circa 1957 Daimler DK400 limousine. Now, this was actually withdrawn for the auction, and I've tried to do a little bit digging to try and find something on it. I've got no chassis number, I've got no registration number, so I'm afraid I'm fumbling in the dark for that one, and I've absolutely nothing. Lot 66 was a 1978 Land Rover Series 3 fire tender. Now, this sold for just £1,265 at the auction, and as you can see by the picture, it's not in the greatest state of repair. It was sold as a non-runner and also didn't have any documents. Now, having a quick look to try and find out what's happened for it, I found a few pictures. Here's one, I think, from around about 93, 94, where it's looking a bit more loved, and that was by Peter on Flickr. And interestingly, the second picture I found, which was from 98, was by an Adam Floyd, and I'm wondering if that's the same Adam Floyd that actually triggered this series on the Gaydon auction. Having a look over at DVLA, it's showing as sawn, and if we scroll down a little bit, we find that export marker has a yes on it, and that was exported in 2007. So, Lot 67, the very last car in our journey through this auction. This was a 1948 Austin 16 horsepower saloon, sold for $2,115 at the auction. It was all together, but did need recommissioning before returning to the road. Now, this car's had a little bit of an interesting history because it was on a TV programme. It was an Agatha Christie episode in the mid-1980s. Now, if we hop over to DVLA, it's currently showing as sawn, no results of the MOT, and logbook-wise, it did have one issued in 2013. But apart from that, on this car, I'm afraid I've got absolutely nothing. So if you've got any idea where it is, it'd be great to hear from you. And in the meantime, if you've enjoyed this series, please do consider giving that subscribe button a little whack for us. And in the meantime, here's another video that we think you're going to enjoy.